Tonight we'd like to revive some memories for you. Tonight's show is certainly one which I think will appeal most of all to the older viewers amongst you. And we want to take you down memory lane to the dear departed days when you and I were young, Maggie, and before that even, when before the great glimmering, flickering television box came into all our living rooms, back to the days when we were so naive and innocent and joyful that the all-electric wireless, and indeed sometimes it was worked off battery, was the most exciting thing that happened in our lives. I'm sure many of you remember those blissful days. As you probably realise, Radio Byrne this year is celebrating its 50th anniversary. 2RN went on the air in 1926. And sometimes when you think about radio, as compared with television, you might get the impression that all the drama and the glamour in broadcasting came with television. But when you start flicking back through the newspaper headlines of the days, before television started at all, you begin to realise several things. One is that there are some things in this green and misty which don't change very much down through the years. And the other thing you realise is that people got just as het up and angry about the radio in the good old days as they now do about television. For example, in 1933, while the All-Ireland football final was on in Croke Park, sounds of a scuffle was heard on radios around the country, and a group of the lads grabbed the microphone. They managed to get out a few words about the hunger strikers then languishing in Mountjoy before RE engineers copped on and pulled the plug on the whole broadcast. A couple of days later, this remarkable piece of barn door bolting got widespread newspaper coverage when the news headline said, "Following the incident at Croke Park, Dublin, a special guard has, it is reported, been placed on the Cork radio station." Well, that was in 1933. In 1934, and with the devil without having been vanquished, temporarily at any rate, we were being wrapped for pandering to the devil within. Get a load of this, by broadcasting the menace of jazz, my friends. Yes, indeed, it was in the news. "If people understood the meaning of jazz, they would not take part in it," said the Reverend P. Conifrey, parish priest of Clune, at a Gaelic League meeting in Longford. It was explained in the Irish Rosary that jazz was borrowed from the African savages by the Anti-God Society with the object of destroying morals and religion. Well, a full-scale blitz was on jazz. That is all the popular music of the day. Remember, we're talking about the Black Bottom and the Hokey Cokey and Charleston, that sort of thing. And it was joined in by the biggest guns of church and state. 3,000 people paraded in Mohill, bearing banners inscribed, "Down with Jazz" and "Out with Paganism." And a public meeting was held. And one mind-boggling statement from Sean O'Galley, Secretary of the Gaelic League, was that our Minister for Finance, he said, and it was Sean McEntee he was talking about at the time, "Our Minister for Finance has a soul buried in jazz and is selling the soul of the nation for the dividends is selling the soul of the nation for the dividends of sponsored jazz programs." Said Mr. O'Kelly, "He's jazzing away every night of the week." Which must have come as news of Mr. McEntee. But seriously, back in 1934, if you attacked a minister, you were unlikely to get away with it. The comeuppance of Sean Og was sure and swift. 3 days after his exposure of the secret nightly activities of Mr. McEntee and all that jazz, a radio talk he was scheduled to give called "Irish Culture, Its Decline" was suddenly unscheduled. When Mr. Jerry Boland, Minister for Posts and Telegraphs, was asked to comment on this, he said, "Quite true. If Mr. O'Kelly wishes to enter the lists against the government, he can do it, and he'll be taken up on it, but he will not do it on the radio." All the same, the minister's fine-fighting words lost a bit of their clout with a report later in the month that the programme of jazz music from Radio Athlone is being gradually curtailed. Similar action has been taken in connection with the broadcast of what has been condemned as jungle music and crooning. I suppose that included Bing Crosby, God love him, but there you are. The death knell of popular music was sounded when 3 months later, Jack Payne and his famous band will not broadcast from the Dublin studios before they leave Ireland. They want to, but they will not be permitted to do so. Well, in due time, jazz stomped back and was accepted as a sort of a natural expression of youth in Ireland. But some things never change. For example, there's the Tipperary farmer who, so mad at the President's St. Patrick's Day broadcast reference to the prosperity of farmers in Ireland, that unable to interrupt, he relieved his feelings by kicking his wireless set around the room. You see, it didn't just start with television, it was there all the time. They were all at it. By 1936, Ori was reaching out to the world with a presidential broadcast to America and Australia on St. Patrick's Day. But alas, there were almost continuous interruptions, which made Mr. De Valera's words inaudible. Some person or persons had tapped the line between Dublin and Athlone and had thus been able to interrupt the broadcast by means of a telephone. When engineers realised what was happening, the broadcast was transferred to another line. In July that year, Maura Laverty interviewed on the radio a Clare-born Mrs. Kunzen, who had just met Adolf Hitler. And she said she was immensely impressed by him and considered him a very fine type of statesman. Honest, sincere, simple, unassuming, I kid you not, and concerned only for the good of his people. She says nobody could help being taken in, I beg your pardon, being taken by his personality. And that the widely held conviction in England that he's only a figurehead influenced by the men who surround him is pure nonsense. She said that he's the strongest character of them all. Well, 1937, and wait for it, friends, the first ever film broadcast on radio by Radio Byrne. I'll give you that again. The first ever film broadcast on radio by Radio Byrne. Yeah, I thought that would get you, yes. It was relayed from the Stephen's Green Cinema, and it was Laurel and Hardy's spoof on the Bohemian Girl. And the handout says, as some of it is silent, the reaction of the audience to the antics of the stars should prove amusing listening to the listeners. Figure that one out. And folly that, as they say. Well, Ori did, with the circus, if you don't mind, proudly billed as the first show of its kind ever broadcast under canvas. Listeners would hear the circus band, comedy and musical items, tap dancing and the clowns, and Mr. John Duffy himself in a short talk about the circus. But for all these early funnies, Ori was taken very seriously, and its dignity was respected when the green, white and orange emblem of the Free State was flown over Broadcasting House in London, headquarters of the BBC, in the place usually occupied by the Union Jack and the BBC flag. The reason for this was a visit to the BBC chief, Sir John Reith, by Dr. T.J. Kernan, the new director of broadcasting in the Free State. And at home, the people took us very seriously too, and were raging mad they were, when in May 1940, they had to dig into their pockets for an extra 2 and 6pence to buy their licence. The radio licence fee had gone up to 12 and 6pence. Ah dear, the good old days.